Welcome to Coffee and Divination, a podcast about the arts of obtaining hidden knowledge in changing times. Join me, Joanna Farrar, to chat with experts from around the world on tarot, runes, geomancy, and the many ways divination can help us navigate and plan our paths ahead.
First of all, thank you for being here with us, for those of you who are here live, and thank you to everyone who's listening afterwards on the podcast. It's my very great pleasure to have our first returning guest of Coffee and Divination, which is Miss T. Susan Chang, who is a phenomenal author and tarot expert, among many other hats that she wears. Her most recent book is 36 Secrets, a Decanic Journey through the Minor Arcana of the Tarot. That just came out, I believe, in December of 2020. It's a beautiful book. I have my copy as well. And it is a really wonderful book that I'm excited to talk to you about today. She's also the author of Tarot Correspondences, Ancient Secrets for Everyday Readers, and she's the co-host of the Fortune's Wheelhouse podcast with Mel Meline. Susie also designs and creates beautiful tarot deck cases, crafts personalized astrological perfumes, and is a gifted teacher of many of the tarot arts.
Oh my God.
Well, you are.
Thank you.
All of that is completely true. So thank you for being here, Susie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so super excited to be here because this book has been, such a personal project for me and such a labor of love. So, just getting to talk to anyone about it is an absolute honor and a privilege. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I definitely did. I was very excited when I first heard about it. When I first heard that this was coming out, I was excited because when I heard the title, I was really excited to see that you were going to dive into the connections between tarot and the Decans, which is something that I think is now getting more attention and information out there for people, but it's still not the most common subject area, I think, for people, though I'm glad to see that's really changing.
Isn't. Yes, absolutely. And I think Austin Coppock's 36 Faces did an enormous amount of valuable work exposing and sort of illuminating those connections for the first time whenever it came out. And I really just felt that was so worthwhile, the sort of the richness of putting these correspondences together that are often very contrarian, very strange, very, very challenging to look into. I always find that's fertile ground for learning more and discovering more.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and we're going to dive into, I'm sure, a lot of the things surrounding that in detail. But just to give people a little bit of an entryway, because the Decans are still a little bit unfamiliar for some people, do you think you could give us a brief introduction to what the Decans are?
Yes, absolutely. So the Decans are essentially, if you take the circle of the zodiac, you have your 12 signs, and then each sign divides into 3 Decans, 3 10-degree sections of each sign. So 10 times 36 is 360 for our circle, or 10-degree arcs of the sky. You can think of it either physically or abstractly, depending on what you want. So, and as it happens, there are 40 minor arcana in the tarot, 40 numeric minor arcana, of which if we take out the aces, we now have the 2 through 10s of the 4 suits, and that's 36 as well. So what the Golden Dawn did when sort of conceptualizing how correspondences would work within tarot, when they released their tarot and also the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot, they kind of found ways to assign these decanic correspondences to the minor arcana, starting with the 2 of Wands with Aries. So, and then you just keep going, 2, 3, 4 of Wands are Aries, and then we switch over to Taurus, to Earth, and so 5, 6, 7 of Pentacles become Taurus 1, 2, and 3, and so on and so forth, all the way down to Pisces, where we have the 8, 9, and 10 of Cups. Mm-hmm.
And so that is like it's the breakdown of each well, each decan, each of the 36 decans corresponds to one of the three places, in each of those zodiacal signs. But they are they're quite ancient in terms of their reach. So they're a great deal older than the Golden Dawn.
Absolutely. Yes, and I think one thing that we find among the Decan commentaries, going back to the Hellenistic era to Arabic astrology to the Chaldeans, is that these Decans are a way of conceiving, of looking at the sky and imagining it to be filled with presences, which is haunting and beautiful. I think the idea that these presences, you can connect with them through magical means, and that they have an influence from that part of the sky on us here below.
Mm-hmm. And we're going back as far as ancient Egypt and into prehistory, possibly before then, depending on who you talk to.
Yes. And I think what's so interesting about it is that, there's depending on the commentator, you can get a really wide variety of different images, but they all seem to have a kind of through line. They all seem to have a feeling about them. And, they're human figures, they're theriomorphic figures, there's people doing strange things, there's mythical figures, people wearing odd things. And you just know that every commentator was getting something different, because that's how divination and magic work. Whatever it is that we receive is kind of filmed through our own filter. So while it's always going to come across slightly differently depending on the subjectivity it hits, it's also going to have some kind of fascinating arcane through line. And to me, discovering that was just magical.
Mm-hmm. So when we're thinking about these decanic spirits, I mean, they've been described as, as figures, as gods, as spirits, as just, names and thoughts about asterisms that might have been in the sky at different times. I mean, how do you think of the spirits that are described in some ways, like you said? I mean, I should have had in my notes some of the descriptions of some of them, because they are, some of them, quite strange.
They are, especially, if you're used to scenic minors in the tarot. You're used to people kind of doing particular things, certain little scenes, especially Rider-Waite-Smith. There tend to be more or less everyday scenes, although some people are in more stressful situations than others, like the Five of Pentacles. But these Decan images tend to be people who are often doing something a little bit more, a little bit more extraordinary. So probably the most extreme version that comes to mind immediately is the one for the 10 of Cups. Let's see, I have to decide whether to use the Agrippa one or the Picatrix one. They're both not particularly PG. Okay, so I think this is Agrippa. A sad man full of evil thoughts, thinking of deception and treachery, and before him is a woman with a donkey climbing atop her, and in her hand is a bird. And it signifies advancement and lying with women with a great appetite and of quiet and seeking rest.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that one. And then I think to myself, how could I forget about that one? Really?
Exactly. And, and some of them are, images of kings or images of people farming. They're much more sort of sedate, or at least sort of more PG. But then you have some that have, like, there's in Aquarius, both the first and the third decan have a man whose head is mutilated. So, it's really peculiar. And I think they are striking and strange in the same way that, you might populate a memory palace with something that's striking and strange. It's meant to have an emotional effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that it's also, they're forces that are not easy to understand, which is why, I mean, in my limited experience with these, which is part of the reason why then it has such a depth that you can get into with it, because they do have sometimes jarring effects when you first kind of visualize or work with these spirits, and then it goes places you wouldn't expect, sometimes much less disturbing than you would expect from some of the imagery.
Yes, and some of them, it's very much in line with what you'd expect from what you know of the zodiac sign. The decans of Aries are quite martial, quite warlike, quite aggressive, and other ones are sort of less so and a little bit more cryptic. So just trying to understand that has been a very fruitful process.
So before we kind of dive into how the Golden Dawn, and then how you and other people can sort of think with these decans powers and also their imagery with the tarot itself, and how that kind of deepens our understanding of the tarot, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the idea of a decan walk, because this was a journey of a year. And this is something that I've done, and I learned about it through Gordon White. That was how I first heard about this and did that process, that he had shared with his membership. But I wanted to know kind of if you could explain a little bit what the walk was for you, and what that means.
Yeah. It would be really great to compare notes, actually, because although I had heard of it from Gordon, I was not involved in the course at the time. I kind of go in and out of our RSPM membership, and I wasn't in at the time. So I just knew that it existed, and I knew that Gordon had led this thing and that Austin had done it. And I thought, well, that sounds like a really great idea. And it's almost March. So if I'm going to do it, I should really do it. And so this was March 2019. And for me, it seemed to make sense because, I really love the Decanic Minor Arcana. I really love those 2 through 10 minors. I think that they are incredibly accessible and really deep, and that they are in a certain way more friendly to work with than the major arcana. I mean, I feel like the minors have a kind of traction in everyday life that I find very appealing. So I've been thinking for some time about the association of the minor arcana with their 2 majors. So since we say that each minor arcanum is associated with a decan, well, that means that it's associated with a sign, right? And therefore it also is associated with the ruler of that decan, which sort of is a kind of rotates through the Chaldean order, the 7 traditional planets. So for example, we start with Mars and Aries as the 2 of Wands. So that gives you 2 majors that are associated with it as well. Actually, can I share my screen? Because I have...
Yes, if I need to allow that, I will, but...
Yeah. This is probably the easiest way to...
there we go.
Do this. Okay, good. I'll just bring this up. There we go. So, so it was really easy to just sort of say, okay, if the 2 of Wands has something to do with Mars and something to do with Aries, what are the major arcana associated with that? And they are the Tower and the Emperor. And I thought, thinking about these different cards and their major associations really just made me puzzle and wonder and want to know more. I think the very first one I got really involved with was the 4 of Cups, which is, the Moon, the High Priestess, and Cancer, the Chariot. And I remember lying sick one day and just thinking about the Chariot and the Priestess and what could they possibly have to do with the 4 of Cups. And it took me years to work my way through that. But of course, as a consequence of thinking about these things, that made me really interested in doing the decan work, because I'd accumulated these notes on the minors as I'd sort of started thinking. I called it minors through majors at the time. I had these sort of like piles of notes on major arcana and how they inflected through the minors. And I thought, okay, well, doing a Decan walk would be a really great way to systematically go through each one and live through those energies and see what I could learn from them, and if I could actually reconcile the major arcana, the minor arcana, the Decan commentaries, and anything else I could think of. So, I decided it was time to do it, and the discipline of writing, a 2,000 word essay every 10 days was substantial.
Yes.
But incredibly rewarding. And I think, for me, it was a writing exercise and a thinking exercise and a completionist exercise. It was not particularly a magical exercise for me, although I think it is for other people in some ways. And I'd be really interested to hear how you did it, because I know that, everyone kind of takes the Decan walk differently. Some people, ritualize it. Some people write through it. So what did you do for yours?
Well, basically, through the course of the year, there was a ritual. Partially, a lot of it was inspired by Gordon White's work and kind of informed by what he shared with the membership there. So there was a ritual portion that was basically what he had come up with. I think he might have worked with Austin on it. I'm not really sure what that, how much back and forth there was between the two of them. But so the ritual portion was that. And it was only about halfway through the year that I realized that incorporating more like artistic and actually writing into the act, it started to make more sense for me as well. But that didn't come until a little bit later in the process. So I think it's really wonderful that you started from the very beginning of the walk, like knowing that was going to be a part of your process through it.
Yes, I thought I would be able to learn something, and I definitely did. Did you, and were you sort of supposed to look out for magical synchronicities and things like that as you went?
Which I definitely found. And that was going to be one of my questions to you, is I know that, you pull cards every day as part of your practice. And you are very, I very much admire your ability to spreadsheet and keep such fabulous records. I'm okay with the records, but probably not like you.
Well, it does bring out my Virgo.
Well, that's fabulous. But did you notice different things in terms of your record keeping, or in terms of what you noticed in your daily pulls when you were doing this, like in each of those 10-day processes?
So, it's funny, even though 36 Secrets has been out since January, and I've talked to a lot of people about it, it didn't occur to me to actually check until 2 hours ago to see which Decans I actually saw the card in.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
And so, so I discovered new spreadsheet. I discovered that happened. Let's see, it looks like 15 times that I had, it coordinated that I drew that card within that Decan. And I draw 2 cards a day. So if I were a little bit more numerate, I could probably do the statistics and tell you whether that was normal or not, but I'm not. So.
I will leave that to one of our listeners to do that. I will not do that.
Yeah. So I kind of went through and looked at those 15, 16 instances to see what happened on those days. And it was really quite remarkable. There were some really good syncs. And of course, most of the time I was just writing about the card because that's what the exercise was. But it looks like, for example, the very first time during Aries 1, I drew the 2 of Wands reversed. And the kids were just really tough that day. Very uncooperative. Both were really just incredibly difficult. And both my husband and I were dropping and breaking things constantly. Mm-hmm. So, and the energy of that Decan is, let's see, there's something about insolence in it, I think. Yeah, there's a boldness, fortitude, loftiness, and shamelessness, like one that is angry, is the old Decan commentary on it. So, and I definitely felt that. I could feel that sort of like roiling, restless, warlike energy in the household, though, fortunately no one actually got hurt. But I think some things did get broken. And then let's see, another interesting one happened in May. I got the Eight of Swords during Gemini 1. And my husband, and the Eight of Swords, of course, is that immobilized woman, right, with her, who's all bound up and not going anywhere with the blindfold. And my husband got stranded with a flat tire. So, and that was a day that affected him, obviously, but it also affected me because as the person who was the anchor at home, I had to kind of coordinate with the insurance and stop what I was doing and just kind of try and get everything back on track. So, that was not so great. A kind of less dark one happened on the Four of Swords. This would be Libra 3. So it was a really delightful day because the Fortune's Wheelhouse Academy group occasionally, in non-COVID times, we have gotten in the habit of having a meetup in the fall, during that lovely time of year here in New England. And they had been around that day. And, we just spent the whole afternoon together playing games and tarot games and talking and stuff. And at one point, I've noticed with this card that there's, first of all, the Four of Swords is the Lord of Truth. So there is a sort of a feeling of restfulness about it, a feeling of taking time out of the world, which this very much was. And I've often found, but I didn't really realize it until this day, that something happens where I have to take a nap. And in this case, I had a very special piece of chocolate. And and I fell asleep right there in the middle of everything. So, and then I realized afterwards that, yes, that is, that's something that happens very often, not necessarily the chocolate, but the nap with Four of Swords, where in broad daylight, I've been up very late, or I'm just tired, or I'm doing journey work, or, or something. And I go into a trance or into a dream in the middle of the day. So, so that was interesting. And there's a few others, but that's the kind of thing where I found with these instances that something that was quite concrete added itself to the meaning of the card for me, something that I would not necessarily have just, come up from my brain. I just sort of experienced it and lived it. And that to me was exactly what I was looking for in the course of doing the Decan walk.
Yeah. I think that kind of, just to be clear for people, like when I will say, when I first heard about a Decan walk, I was like, oh, is this a walk? Is it like the Appalachian Trail where you're going to go you're doing hiking? Yeah. I don't understand. But it's you could incorporate walking as part of it, but it is that journey, that concretizing of bringing in some sort of ritualized form, honoring and being aware of that Decan into your daily life, through the each 10-day period in some way. And like you said, what that looks like and what actions or how it speaks back to the person is very different, depending on how it manifests. I had a question that's kind of following on for that. So you completed that walk. Would you do it again? Would you think that it would be different for you if you did it again? I mean, you wouldn't necessarily be writing another book on it, but
yes, right. I would like to do it again at some point, and I would like to, probably not for a while, but I'd like to focus on doing magical work with it next time, I think. And, I'm trying to develop a sort of magical praxis around tarot based on image magic of the traditional kind. And I don't really know exactly what that's going to look like. I've kind of experimented with talismans and things like that. But I would really love to focus on doing a Decan walk where I create something magically operant around that card, that I might be able to tap into later on. So, the interesting thing is that I don't really mean that I would create something, create an object in that time frame, because who knows whether electionally it would be okay. It's the only thing we would know is that the sun would be in that decan, and we don't know whether the ruling planet would be in decent condition or whatever it is. But I would like to conceptually come up with something magical for each decan, something that puts me not just in the sort of like looking out for the synchronicity, but thinking about, how I might work with that card and kind of make friends with it and use it as a tool.
Yeah, that would be very, very interesting. Just in talking about this, there was a question from one of the people in the chat, and I think it's a good one to broach right away, which is, if someone is a beginner and they are hearing some of this for the first time, what are some of the resources that you would recommend for learning about this? I would say, obviously your book is a very, very good way in. The one I would also go think about is Austin's 36 Faces, but that's impossible to get a copy of at the moment.
He'll have it out. He'll have it out soon, I'm sure. We've talked about it, and I know that he's, working. He's in the final stages. He's also self-publishing, so it is a big lift at the end, and I know he'll have it out this year.
Are there any other sources that you kind of went to? I when I was reading through your book, I noticed that you mentioned, because for people that are listening that may not know, there are a number of different commentaries on the Decans. So in various ones of these commentaries, the earliest kind of come from, I believe, like 3rd century AD, the written sources. And then there's later ones, obviously, and the Picatrix is one of those. So there's a number of different, sort of sources for these images and ideas about them, from pretty early to much later. You mentioned the Picatrix a lot when you were talking about these images. Did you go a lot to that source? That was your main one?
I absolutely did, because Picatrix comes in a bunch of different flavors. It's like there was originally the Arabic version that was, originally where it was an Arabic sorcerer or magician or astronomer, I guess, astrologer, who wrote it. But the thing is that it was so influential that it was translated into Latin and then sort of disseminated from there. So if you look at Agrippa, for example, when I'm using Agrippa, that's actually based on Latin Picatrix. So, there's a whole sort of tradition that built up around Picatrix, that through kind of like a game of Decanic telephone, there's like all these versions that aren't even exactly the same, but which a lot of Western magicians all worked off of. So I find Picatrix very interesting to use for that reason. And it also has a really comprehensive, whole chapter on Decans. So I think it's book 2, chapter 11. And so the version I used was the one that's very widely available by Chris Warnock and John Michael Greer.
Yes.
And then I also would look at what Agrippa had, which would often diverge. But I also really like Dana Trell's new Picatrix, which is from the Latin as well. That's a really good translation. And there's a new one coming out by Liana Saif. I don't know when it's going to be, but that's based on the Arabic, and I'm going to be first in line to get that.
Yeah, I don't know about that. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, she's been working on it for some time. And I saw a message from Alan Scalpone go by in the chat about the correspondences. And yes, Crowley used the same Decanic correspondences as the Golden Dawn. He was a Golden Dawn member. He did do things his own way quite often. And as we know, he made some changes in the correspondences, but the Decanic ones are the same. He changed the names a little bit. So, for example, the 3 of Pentacles would be in Golden Dawn, it's the Lord of Material Works. He just called it the Lord of Work. So, they're just a little bit more succinct, but I really like those very succinct one-word, keyword names, Lord or Hermetic title names for the Decans, and those are the ones I use.
So as you mentioned, so just to be clear for people, so the links between the various minor arcana, if you take out the aces, you have 36. So for the 36 decans, those corresponding minor cards, the ones that we now traditionally use, that linkage was made by members of the Golden Dawn. So
yes.
Are there any? You wrote your book on this, so you're probably going to say no. I agree with all of them, but I was just going to say, are there any that you say, you know what? I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, could you see it another way, type of thing?
There were definitely tough ones. There were definitely tough ones. In fact, I made a kind of a list at one point when I was starting to talk to people about it. I think I said, let's see, hard to match Decans. I have 2 written down here. Mm-hmm. One of them was that 4 of Swords, which we mentioned before, because, we talked about the 4 of Swords as being this rather peaceful looking card, at least a respite from strife. It's sometimes called, actually, rest from strife. And whereas the Decan commentaries, all right, I'm going to read them both, the ones that I have here. One is a man riding a donkey with a wolf in front of him. The other one is a violent man holding a bow, and before him a naked man, and also another man holding bread in one hand and a cup of wine in the other, signifying evil works, sodomy, adultery, singing, joy and flavors.
Yes, that's very hard to match with
very
rest,
hard
meditation,
to match.
Dream work. Yes.
Yes, exactly. It was extraordinarily difficult to me. But the way I kind of started to think about it is that, these images are almost apocalyptic. They're almost like, they almost are ecstatic. They're people almost leaving themselves. So the way I started to think of it was through the connection of ecstatic gnosis. So where you might have, drumming or dancing or hunting or singing or, or sex to get you to the point where you leave your body. And that to me was the way that I kind of found my way into drawing that connection. The idea that there is there is a frenzy, a whirling quality, a hurricane quality, and then there's the center of the hurricane, because there's very much, I call that chapter the widening gyre. There's a sort of, and I think Austin calls it the gyroscope. So there's something about it, about the finding equilibrium, but in the midst of a world in disequilibrium. Mm-hmm. So I think the Decan commentaries really, really seem to emphasize the disequilibrium, but that's the connection that I made. And then the other one that was quite difficult, apparently, for me, in my notes, was the 6 of Cups, which, of course, for Rider-Waite-Smith is this sort of beautiful, beautifully golden hour. Lit, golden sunset lit scene in a courtyard where either a child or a little person is giving another a bouquet of flowers. And the here's Beatrix, a man naked and a woman naked and a man sitting on the earth, and before him 2 dogs biting one another. The other one's a man riding a camel holding a scorpion in his hand. Scorpio, okay. So, because it's the middle decan of Scorpion. But impudence, deceit, and false dealing, and lending mischief and strife amongst men. So that was tricky. But to me, again, there's a quality in there. First of all, the sort of whole nakedness thing. There's that. There's a very sexual Decan, and right in the heart of Scorpio. And also there's a sense of being haunted about it, right? So when we talk about these the two dogs biting one another, or the naked man and woman, or the man sitting on the earth. There's the image of the man holding a scorpion. There's a quality of seeking to have influence on one another in this almost violent way, to have an effect, to haunt one another as spirits. And so to me, that card is extraordinarily spirit ridden and extraordinarily haunted. It actually falls right at that period, in the heart of Scorpio, when we've just been through the hallowed season, and we're all, the veil is very thin. So there's something about that, the longing expressed in that card, that I think is darker than it appears. So, for example, there's a lot of cards that look dark but aren't necessarily really like the Death card. I actually don't think the Five of Cups is as bad as it seems. I don't think the Ten of Swords is as bad as it seems. But the Six of Cups is deceptively deep, and when I look at it, I get feelings of longing, feelings of nostalgia, feelings of what in Portuguese would be called saudade, which is that sense of desire for something that's gone, desire in the past. So when I think about that card, there is a definite connection with the Decan. If you sort of take the Decan imagery down a notch and kind of raise the energy of the Six of Cups card, you can kind of get there in the middle, in these feelings that are almost painfully poignant.
And just looking at how you combine the two major arcana cards, because at the beginning of each, section for each of these decans, for each of these minor cards, you show an image of the minor card itself, and flanked on either side by the two major cards that are associated with it, by sign, and by planet. So I thought it was really beautiful how you showed how the influences of those two major arcanas kind of blend together into sort of creating the feeling and the effect of the minor arcana card. And I was wondering if you could maybe give us an example of a decan where, those two influences come together.
Yeah,
just of your choice, or I can choose one, or you can choose one.
A really great one, I just turned to it actually, is a really fantastic one, is the Four of Wands. It is a classic example because it's Venus rules the first decan, the third decan of Aries. And so what does Venus correspond to? The Empress. What does Aries correspond to? The Emperor. So when you take the two of those and you put them together, you have the marriage of the Lord and the Lady. And when you look at the Four of Wands card, it has this air of celebration and joy. It's the wedding, not the marriage, but there's at the same time, there's this feeling of serendipity and of things kind of coming together. So that combination really illuminated that card for me. It's not just a party. It's this like bringing together of things that are meant to be together. So I call that beauty weds the architect, because, beauty being the Empress and the architect being the Emperor, this idea that there's the natural forces of life, the creative forces of life, beauty and growth, and the urge, the sort of the desire of the universe to reproduce itself. And then you have imposed structure and the ways that we work with that as people, to create a combination of the eternal and organic and the sort of ephemeral and constructed. So, and the imagery on the Decan card of the Four of Wands shows this sort of chuppah structure that has these four wands that have the cut garlands on it. So there's this kind of, and in the background is a castle. So there's the presence of nature and beauty in the sort of garlands and in the wreaths that the little figures are holding up. but there's also an acknowledgement that it passes, and that, you know, we can kind of make the most of it in the moment that we have by kind of creating structures of beauty. So I find that very moving about that card. You know, it's not just a party.
Yeah. It's a party, but that idea of marriage as being the structure that comes in with love, that is the structure we use to help love be something that is at least a little bit more lasting. It's still not everlasting because of change always, but yeah.
Yes, and the way that we use that chuppah as a symbol, you know, for the house that you build out of marriage. Yeah.
That's a beautiful example. And I think there were, I mean, obviously they're all very intriguing and very interesting. There were a few others. There was one that I wanted to kind of see if we could talk about right now, which would be the one that we're in right now, which is Pisces 1 we are in right now.
Pisces
and
1.
when I mentioned this to you by email, you said this was a very interesting one. And I of course, I read it in the book and I thought this was a fascinating one. And I think it's appropriate that we talk about it today.
Yes, it really is. It's the first decan of Pisces, which is associated with the moon card, which is confusing, of course, right? Because, you know, it's the high priestess that's associated with the planet, the moon, the luminary, the moon. But the zodiacal sign of Pisces is actually associated with the moon card. And, you know, and when I think about that, I think about the moon's capacity to connect with the unconscious, the collective, the seas of Pisces, the sort of eternal dissolution. And it's interesting because that first decan of Pisces is ruled by Saturn. Now, we've just gone through 6 decans in Saturn's kingdom, Capricorn and Aquarius, right? So Saturn gets one more shot before the zodiacal year is out. And after, you know, so you have this progression from sort of, I think what Austin likes to call inside the wall, Capricorn, and outside the wall, Aquarius, you know, the wall being Saturn. Sort of these negotiations with the idea of structure. And then in this first decan of Pisces, you can see Saturn kind of have this last gasp before everything dissolves, because it's this one decan that Saturn has at the end of all things. And it's interesting to me, particularly because if you look at the majors, the world and the moon, the world represents Saturn, which is kind of hard to get your head around in a way at first, because the world seems like a very joyous card, and Saturn, as we know, is a dour master of no. So, but what I take from that card to be most Saturnine about it is the wreath around the dancing figure in the world card, which is a wreath of protection, but also can feel like a prison. So whenever we have enclosures, the question is it protection or is it a prison? So, so one thing that I really associate with the Eight of Cups is the act of dreaming. And in fact, when I go to sleep every night, I kind of, in my mind, travel down this rocky slope towards a river. And for me, going to sleep is the same thing as getting in a boat and going on that river for, I just don't know. I'm not going to necessarily remember what happens, or I'll try to remember some of it, but I won't remember everything that happens. And it's sort of a circular river that returns to the same spot, but which to me is also like the wreath of the world. And the other thing that's interesting about it is that if you look at the world card and the moon card, those are kind of a shorthand for the act of dreaming, because the moon, of course, presides over dreams in the night sky while we're dreaming. And at the same time, the world kind of represents the safety of the sleeping body, you know, kind of enclosed in this trance for 8 hours or however long it is. And also there's certain ways that that the world is associated Kabbalistically with Malkut, the lowest Sephira on the tree of life, who is also kind of associated with the princesses or pages. And there's a whole sort of metaphors of sleep that are associated with those princesses and pages. Anyway, so if you take the two of those, you have this metaphor of the dreaming body and its safety, and also where it's going. Because if you look at that Eight of Cups, you can see this rocky shoreline and the seas of the unconscious before, next to the figure. And you know that some deep internal process of repair is going on, some reconciliation of the unconscious material. So I really, really love that card for that reason. And it reminds me always of, what you discover in water. I often used to get this card in the days before COVID. I would go swimming on Thursdays, which is the day of Jupiter. Jupiter's the ruler of Pisces. Anyway, and I would find myself, usually at Saturn hour, because that's how my schedule was, at the pool. And the moment I got in the water, it was sort of like, connecting with a different side of myself and kind of surrendering and dissolving. So that card, always has something to do for me with that notion of dreaming. It also has to do with the sort of confused images that the moon raises. When you try to look at what you're dreaming, it doesn't really make sense in a plot-driven sort of narrative way. If it were a Netflix show, it would be shot down immediately because it makes no sense. But it has an emotional truth to it that you can pick up. And one thing that I think about with that archetype of the moon is the way that these watery signs, the signs of Cancer and Scorpio and Pisces, are all related to the Hanged Man, which is related, corresponds to elemental water. I associate that Hanged Man myth with the rites of Odin, who hung on the tree for 9 days and 9 nights. And the phrase is, he sacrificed himself to himself, which I think is just beautiful. And to me, one way of sort of thinking about that metaphor of sacrificing yourself to yourself is the act of going to sleep, sacrificing your ego consciousness, for that period in order to gain something magical and different and deeply revivifying as well. So when I think about that card, I think there's sacrifice involved in it, and I think that there's rejuvenation, and there's something deeply mystical about entering into those waters of Pisces. I have my rising in this decan as well. There's something deeply mystical about entering into those waters and knowing that once you kind of give up, you'll be reborn.
Mm-hmm. And without that sacrifice, then there's no possibility of real renewal. So that's the important part of Saturn in terms of, actual growth and fertility being necessary, but you have to be able to give up that ego. You have to be able to face that.
Yes. There's a willingness to go into the night, and not know what's going to happen. And I called it the farthest shore because that's a tribute to Ursula Le Guin's the final book in her Earthsea trilogy, where Ged, the sorcerer, goes way out to the edges of the known, which is where we are now in Pisces 1, and confronts his shadow, not to destroy it, not to annihilate it, not to prevail over it, but to embrace and integrate it. So that's the work, I think, of this decan.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And
beautiful work it is.
Yes. And I loved that in that particular, chapter on that decan, you incorporated and used some of the text for Odin from the Havamal.
Yes. It seemed to make a lot of sense there. Yeah.
And just, this is kind of, I'm kind of skipping a little bit in terms of what I wanted to ask, but with that really brings up something that's another beautiful aspect of this book, which I wanted to point out, is that at the end of each one of these, little synopses, these little chapters on each of the decan cards, you usually included either a full poem or a segment from a poem or other work of literature. And each relating to the card and some of what you'd spoken about. And that was really beautiful. And I was wondering kind of how you came to that, or if that was something
I
planned.
think because when I was writing the blog posts, I kind of got in the habit of looking for something to kind of finish off the blog post with, because I think with a lot of this work, it's so elusive. It's both elusive and elusive, right? It's the connections are indirect, they're metaphorical. You sometimes can't go at them in a really straight ahead way. And poetry is like that, right? You get the deep truth of things without the fact. So doing that during the Decan walk was so interesting and uplifting and inspiring that I felt that it would be really great to do that for all of them. And so, in the process of putting the book together, I kind of tried to make sure that every essay had a little bit, each essay had the same elements. So I would talk about what happened in my own life. I would talk about the connections with the majors. I would talk about the connections with the Decan commentators, but I also wanted to have some kind of literary epigraph at the end, sort of like the way you have an epigraph at the beginning of a chapter or a book, to make you think in ways that I don't tell you, exactly what you have to think. But I think that if you read this lyrical piece of somebody else's thoughts, that it will inspire connections of your own.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you can only see it out of the corner of your eye, and that
Exactly.
the poem lets you kind of see it out of the corner of your eye instead of trying to stare directly at it.
Right. You kind of come at it sideways.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a really beautiful thing, and I particularly loved that you had that for that Decan. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I really love that. That's Auden's version of the Havamal, and it is just gorgeous.
Yeah, that is very gorgeous.
Yeah.
Before I go and continue with questions, I wanted to just mention that in the chat, I put a link that people can click on if you are here live. If you are not here live, I'm sorry, there is no link you can click on. But if you are here live, you can click on that link. And if you have a question that you'd like to anonymously submit for Susie to do a one-card reading on towards the very end of this interview, you can click on that link and submit it, and I will choose at random, a few minutes from now when we do that. But I wanted to just mention it so people see that in the chat.
Oh, and I thought it might be nice to mention that since we just did the Eight of Cups, but it's coming out in the Nine of Cups Decan, just the sort of difference between the Eight of Cups and Nine of Cups feel, because, we've had this sort of beautiful, dark, mysterious Eight of Cups, which is my favorite, but it goes from the Saturn-ruled Decan of the Eight of Cups to the Jupiter-ruled Decan of the Nine of Cups. And in that transition from the Lord of Indolence, Eight of Cups, to the Lord of Happiness, Nine of Cups, you can really see the different character of Saturn and Jupiter emerging. Not only is Jupiter the Decan ruler for Pisces too, but he's in traditional rulership there as well. So, you can see just how great that is in the Nine of Cups, the card of wishes, which I call fishes and wishes. There's a feeling of joyous anticipation in that Decan. And I think for us, those of us who live in the Northern Hemisphere, that's also true, just all around us. You can sort of feel spring just getting ready, to pull itself together and burst forth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of leads directly, actually perfectly, to what I wanted to talk about next, which is, you had the book of correspondences, the tarot correspondences that we talked a little bit about last time you were on the show, and that, I have sitting over there on my shelf, and it's fantastic. What I liked about this book is that you talk about correspondence. I mean, there's no way not to talk about them, but it's in a little bit, it almost feels more of it's almost like a novel form. It's like a long form description in some ways that was different from how you approached it in that tarot correspondences book. But there's still so much of that where you really pull threads together from the various cards. So as you're reading through, you will be referencing back and saying, well, if you remember how Jupiter, presented in this other card, you can see how there's a similarity, but now this is different because of where it's finding, itself. And I wanted to talk, maybe we could use Jupiter as an example, since you just brought that up, and kind of look at the various, minor arcana cards that Jupiter, kind of presents himself in, and how they're very different. Maybe not always the way you would expect someone like Jupiter to present.
Exactly right. And, and I think that Tarot Correspondences was really a reference book in a way. It was sort of like me saying, I really got to get all this stuff on an external hard drive because I can't keep it all in here, and maybe other people can use it, kind of a thing. And it has turned out to be like that, which is great. But this book, which, I love it because it is trying to pull all those threads together and show you, if we use correspondences as a synaptic map of the world, what you can do with that and how that can create meaning within a tarot reading. So yeah, as far as the minors of Jupiter go, it is interesting. I actually kind of go at the correspondences for Jupiter minors a couple different times in the book because they're so odd and worthwhile to look at. There are 5 of them, which is true of all planets except for Mars, which has 6, because we have 7 times 5 is 35. And then you have 1 left over, and Mars gets both the beginning and the end.
Well, of course, because Mars says, yes, of course I will get more.
Right. So Jupiter has 5, and they are the 8 of Swords in Gemini 1, the 6 of Wands, which is Leo 2, the 4 of Swords, which is Libra 3, which we talked about, the 2 of Pentacles, which is Capricorn 1, and then, of course, the 9 of Cups, Pisces 2, which we were just talking about. So, and it's really quite interesting to look at those separately because you can kind of see how Jupiter does in these different decans as an extension of its dignity in the sign, which you can't always do, but there's usually a way that you can work that out. So, for example, 8 of Swords, not great, not great, but Jupiter is in fact in detriment in Gemini because it's opposite Sagittarius where he's in rulership. So we can say he's in detriment there. And we can say that he doesn't do particularly well there simply because he's planets in detriment kind of suffer a little bit. They're maybe ignored or maybe insulted, but their agency is bound to some degree. And interestingly, if you look at the Jupiter in Pisces that we just did, you can see how well it does, how exceptionally happy it is in that. And it's also, I also have some Kabbalistic ideas about why that might be the case. 1, 6, and 9s are particularly well balanced. So Jupiter is in the 6, and the 6 of Wands does quite well there, even though it is peregrine, has no particular dignity in Leo. But at the same time, you have Jupiter or Zeus, the king of the gods, and Leo, the sort of central regal force in the heart of the zodiac. So there's a sort of thematic link there that seems to make sense. And then we have the one that we've talked about, the 4 of Swords, is Jupiter kind of as that expansive force that helps you find equilibrium in Libra. But the one that I find most fascinating, I think, is Jupiter in Capricorn. And, I don't necessarily think he's in fall there. Jupiter is obviously, exalted in Cancer. He's in fall there, but it makes me think of something interesting because I think that, even when planets are debilitated, when we look at the decan that they rule, they have a very particular kind of dignity that is special. And Austin's talked about this. He got it from Bonatti originally. The idea that decanic dignity is what you can do for yourself, kind of the way you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Sometimes rulership and exaltation are, and other forms of dignity like bounds and triplicity, they're likened to the kind of privileges you get from being a sovereign, or from being a guest in a sovereign's house, or having citizenship in a country, or just having connections, in sort of decreasing order. But decanic dignity is just what you can do for yourself, and that's why I love it. That's why I love the minors. It's for the same reason. They're things that anybody can do for themselves. So even though Jupiter is in fall in Capricorn 1, at a moment in our year where the light is as its absolute shortest, this is the winter solstice, as the first day of Capricorn 1. And to me, that card represents the turning of energy from, the pivot of the year. And that's why the infinity sign is always on the two of Pentacles. I mean, it's not why, it's because graphically that lemniscate shape seems to fit on the card. It has since the Marseille deck. But so that's the literal reason. But the energy of that card to me is about the pivot of the year, about the interchange of energies, about being able to make something out of the darkest moments. And Jupiter's presence there, to me, seems to be something of a luck talisman. And I have often thought it would be good to try and work with that card as a card of serendipity, of attracting fortune in areas where chance governs, like poker games. I'm thinking of putting one downstairs for my husband when he's trading options, hedge funds, anything where wide swings of fate are possible, because, it's like you've put in the clutch, the gears are spinning and anything could happen. So to me, that Two of Discs has a correlation to that, in the same way that the Eight of Wands, which is Mercury in a Jupiter ruled sign where it is in detriment, I use that card, the Eight of Wands, as a talisman for moving luggage, moving things quickly from one place to another. So yeah, these there's something about that presence of Jupiter in that card that is unusual. And I also think that those 5 cards have, you can think of them as having properties related to the Wheel of Fortune, which is Jupiter's card, which I should have mentioned right at the top. I kind of buried the lead there. But for example, like the Six of Wands is like being at the top of the wheel, right? You can use that wheel metaphor. The Eight of Swords is like being bound to the wheel. You can't escape the wheel of samsara. I think of the Four of Swords as being at the hub of the wheel, the equilibrium that you find at the center of the wheel. The Two of Discs is the rotation, the constant change. Everything is constantly changing. It is literally known as the Lord of Change, and the wheel is an avatar of change. And then the Nine of Cups is, to me, the lesson that if you want to prosper in life, you need to align yourself with fate at some level, to put yourself in a position where you're not fighting fate, but working with it. It's fatalistic in a positive sense. And I think about this a lot because, I have this wall of wheel in my office. I have these 10, here, I'm going to try and turn my camera so you can see it. There it is. I have these 10 wheels here. That are some of them have been gifted to me, and some of them are ones I bought for myself. But that is sort of like, if there's any sort of icon that is spiritually significant to me, or any major arcana, it's the wheel, and it's also the reason that I wear this. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so the wheel's important to me.
Yes, the constant change that we're always involved in,
and learning to live with it. I mean, one of my sort of principles of praxis is that you can't, even if you're a tarot reader, you can't predict everything. I mean, you can, you can seek to be part to participate in the rotation of the wheel. But no matter what the change is, there's always a better and a worse response. You can choose the better response. You always have that agency.
Yeah, which brings up kind of going back to the Decan walk. I remember when Gordon was talking about this, I'm not going to say it in the same way that he would, but he related it back in some ways to the practices of sort of potentially in the Old Kingdom of Egypt, the kings wanting to or having rituals that would help them achieve immortality. And that this Decan walk in some ways was related because the Decans, the images of the Decans would be found on the inner lid of the sarcophagus in like middle period Egypt.
Right.
So it started to be like part of the burial rites. So something to do with the journey of the soul and about, bettering your fate or in some way kind of empowering the soul and having protection. So I was kind of, it's an interesting question then, because then since we're talking about divination, we're talking about fate. And part of the practice for some people for this Decan walk is to best align ourselves to these forces. Then potentially kind of everything, I mean, really in what you've done with this book, what I was getting a lot of it was by looking deeply at these cards and understanding all these significances of how the planets and the signs interact with them. You could be lining yourself up to sort of like not have a bad fate. You're trying to cause yourself to be invincible in a way, but since, obviously the wheel turns, so there's always going to be downsides, but you are kind of like trying to better understand the options of your fate.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the metaphor I usually use, and this is also a wheel-based metaphor, is, it's like if you are subject to motion sickness and you're on a boat or you're in a car and you're just the passenger, you feel more sick because you are things are just happening to you. However, if you're the driver, if you're sitting in or pretending you're the driver even, you feel that motion sickness goes away because you have recovered your agency. You are in alignment with the direction you're going. And to me, that is the practice that I'm going for. Not necessarily that I want to always go someplace that is, driven by my ego consciousness, the place that I want to go and the place that I absolutely, will take no other options. However, I want to be in the position where if my road takes me to a place that is, difficult or not of my choosing, I want to be able to see what my options are and how I can work with it and, what the better response is. And I think that that's part of the practice, is to fully expose myself to every way these cards could come up, to every, it's sort of like, becoming immunized or vaccinated. You want to challenge yourself to experiencing, at some level, everything that card has to offer, and to then having that vocabulary, be able to talk back and say, well, maybe we can negotiate. And instead of, Five of Pentacles, meaning that I'm going to be locked out of my apartment, maybe we can have it mean something different. Maybe I can do a ritual with my keys, or, or maybe I can have, to me, that one happens to be associated with ceremonial magic as well, something like, or maybe I can do something where I help someone who is locked out of their house, or I provide keys as a spiritual counselor to someone. There's ways to work with it that are hopefully in accord with the quality of the moment suggested by the Decan, and not its most baneful manifestation.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that is absolutely the point then of magic is having that knowledge, so that then you can try to, well, I don't want to put it as bargain, but you can, be empowered to possibly influence other paths.
Yes, that's true. And the other thing is that, like, eventually things do happen to all eventually the big thing is, of course, we're all going to die someday, but I think when you work through those 5, 6, and 7 of Cups, Scorpio Decans, there's a feeling of how that fits into the larger cycle and how to accept that and make meaning from it while you're here is absolutely crucial. So, I think that doing the Decan walk and experiencing those energies and what they mean in the larger cycle helps to fit you into the larger cycle, into the wheel as well.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. So I wanted to throw it open to some of the one card questions because we had a number submitted. So I will choose at random. If you are ready. So there were actually quite a number that are to do with like work related things. Very interesting. Okay, so I'll just go with question number 3. I want to know if my company should merge or get bought out. What does the outcome of my position look like? So it's definitely a very work related one.
Okay, so can you repeat that?
Yes.
Because there were kind of 2 questions there, and I'm not sure which one is the more important one.
If my company should merge,
If your company, okay.
yeah. So if my company were to be, to merge or get bought out, what does the outcome of my position look like? So basically, what would happen to this person if their company was, merged with another company or bought out?
I got you. Okay, I'm going to add my face in here so I'm not completely gone. There. Okay, this is the setup I use for readings these days, which is nice. Okay, so this is the way I like to draw cards. Sometimes I shuffle and cut, but this is my favorite way to draw cards.
I always prefer that too. Sometimes I do the shuffle and cut.
It's you can't feel, you never feel like you accidentally left the cards in an order of some sort because there's many levels of randomness here. And the other thing is that, oh, by the way, this is Pam's Vintage, which is a version of the Rider-Waite-Smith that is available on Etsy, and you'll see in a minute that I think it's Etsy. I can't remember exactly, but you'll see in a minute that it's borderless and it has this sort of nice feeling to it. Okay, let's see. So what will become of her position if it merges? Oh, I have a jumper. Let's put that guy back. Okay, let's see. Is it this one? I think it's this one. All right. Look, 4 of Wands. Very good. So, so I think, I call this besides calling it Beauty Weds the Architect and the Emperor and the Empress and all that, I call it the card of temporary respites. So to me, that would suggest that there's a grace period where the person will be able to kind of find their feet, maybe get a decent severance package if that's necessary. It's not going to last forever. So when it happens, I think she should consider it a window of opportunity during which she should set herself up for the next thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think excellent. It looks, it's the thing about the 4 of Wands is Venus in Aries, it's Venus in detriment. The detriment here is that it's temporary. It's here and it's gone. So act well, the getting's good.
The wedding does not last for
right. Wedding, not the marriage.
Yes.
So, you might have a little bit of a windfall at that moment and you should use it to get to the next thing.
Okay. Yeah. Next question. What should I be aware of in my new business venture?
Okay. I really like questions that are phrased like that. What do I need to know? What should I be aware of? I think Tara is really good at answering questions in that formula. Let's see. No, I think it's this one. Yeah. Okay. Ooh. It's the devil. Okay.
Intense.
What should I be aware of in my next business venture? Was that it?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, this is going to be, I often think of the devil as the master of the game. I don't necessarily see him as a baneful figure. However, he definitely has those demiurgic qualities. So, it is the card of Capricorn and therefore associated with the 2, 3, and 4 of Pentacles. which I call in the book, I call them the difference engines, and time and materials and money in the bank. So obviously this is going to be a really very focused on goals, very materially oriented enterprise. It's going to be stressful. There's going to be a sense of really wanting to succeed and achieve. So I guess there's actually quite a lot to like about this card for that question. Capricorn is the season here in the northern hemisphere anyway, where the sun is at its northern. I always do this wrong. Alice Calpone's laughing, I know, because I got this wrong in my book, and he actually pointed it out. This is the moment where the sun is at its southernmost point, and it is at its greatest light. So, and there's metaphors of light throughout this card. He's Lucifer, the light bringer. He's associated with the Kabbalistic notion of the eye, which receives light. So, so the challenge with this, of course, is to not lose sight of why you're doing it and what matters. Because as you can see, there's also the inverse pentagram on top of the devil's head here, which is matter over spirit, 4 points over 1 point. And so the caution is, not to get overly addicted to the goal.
Yeah, to whatever those material things are that are in question.
Exactly.
There.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's see, one or two more.
Okay.
This is an interesting one. How can we develop our abilities to communicate with spirits? It's a very different question.
Yeah. Okay. How can we, or how can I?
It was phrased as, it was phrased as how can we, but...
Okay. Yeah, well, we can answer it as phrased and see what happens. It's this one. Okay. Oh, look, it's the hermit. Okay, so, that's so interesting. So, I often think of the hermit as Mercury psychopomp.
Yeah.
Because here he is with his lantern. And I think of this as that moment at the end of the first half of the year when the sun's light is going to diminish. So he's safeguarding it in his lantern. I often think of this as being kind of on the brink of the sun's journey through the duat, through the underworld to rise again on the other side. But there's something very, well, you can read this on numerous levels. One is the study, of course, of spirit contact. You can do that. Two is get control of your ego so that you can get it out of the way. That's the sun in the lantern. So that you can, so that you're willing to pass into the dark. The imagery of the hermit is very often underworld imagery, even though he's kind of at the top of the mountain here. We often see him as a psychopomp figure entering the underworld. And on the Thoth deck and other Thoth-derived decks, like Tabula Mundi, for example, you'll see him with Cerberus in tow, actually. So he's literally on the threshold of Hades. So that's literally doing that work to go into the underworld. Another thing that people might get out of this, because of the figure of the old man here, is the idea of working with your ancestors. Now, this is, of course, associated with the 8, 9, and 10 of Pentacles. And on the 10 of Pentacles, you see the hermit figure sitting in the front of the archway there as a sort of presiding presence, lending his wisdom to those in the community who seek it out, even as he's sort of is on the way out of this life. And I often think of that card as the return of Odysseus, the sort of like, coming back older, wiser, well tested. So, so it could be any one of these things. It could be working with spirits directly through going into the dark. It could be study, and it could be working with your ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely think there's an emphasis, not so much on an emphasis on starting with the dead, with your own dead, as opposed to like jumping off and trying to call up one of the Goetic spirits.
Mm-hmm. Working with your own ancestors.
Yes.
They are oftentimes very happy for you to call as well.
I mean, who else would be as happy as your ancestors to talk to you?
Yes. They always want
you.
You don't call often enough. So.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. And let's do one more.
Okay.
So, my life is in juicy creative chaos. How should I proceed to be happy and successful?
Oh, what a great question. Juicy creative chaos. Love it.
Sounds good.
Okay. How do I proceed? This one. The Lovers. Well, first of all, you're on the right path here. I often think in the context of a question like this that it's a follow your bliss kind of card. To me, the Lovers represents a moment of choice, obviously. That's the kind of classic meaning for it. It's the moment of choice. In fact, as represented in the Rider-Waite-Smith, deciding what you're going to do. So, and because it's a card of Gemini, it's usually a dual choice of some sort. And the lesson of Gemini in the tarot, I find, through the 8, 9, and 10 of Swords, the terrifying lesson is that you have to choose one thing. So in this period of juicy creative chaos, you may well find yourself in a situation where you have competing priorities, where the sort of mundane household stuff comes up and it's tempting to split your attention between the two. But I think the lesson of this card is to seize the moment, is to take the thing that draws you and don't worry about the other things, because this moment comes and goes. It's mutable. It's Gemini. And it's an invitation to participate in your own quest for knowledge, which I believe is the case with all air cards. In your own quest to find the thing that draws you and is particular to your demon. So take the moment as it comes. Don't get distracted by the stupid stuff. Just do the one thing that's important. This is associated with the Hebrew letter Zayin, which is sword, which means you cut away that which is not important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is beautiful. Well, those are some fascinating cards to have drawn for those questions.
Aren't they?
So you answered kind of two questions, which I just kind of would love to have you, kind of answer in brief. One, so if there are jumpers, you don't read those? That's...
I often do. If I were doing a longer reading, I would definitely take that into account.
I see.
But I like to, if it's just a one card, I put it back in and I assume that it will come out again if it wants to.
Mm-hmm. Yep, makes sense. And the other thing was on reversals, because you didn't. I noticed that you.
So in these cases, I didn't deal with the reversals exactly, but I don't read reversals as opposite anyway. I tend to view them as having an asterisk. Mm-hmm. So to me, reversals suggest that, which we saw with the Hermit and also with the Lovers card, suggests that there is some requirement that the querent reach out and grab it. It's not going to drop in their lap. Mm-hmm. There's some effort required. But usually, and the other thing about reversals is that I use them, especially with Rider-Waite-Smith, to determine gaze, what someone's looking at. If they're, and with a couple, whether they're looking at each other or not. If one is looking out of the spread, I'll sometimes draw a card to see what it is they're looking at. So I use it in very literal ways like that. And reversal makes that possible, especially with the court cards.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I generally do sort of take it into account, but I do not, I don't read sort of a cookbook opposite meaning into them.
I couldn't agree more. So no, but that's really interesting, and also I think important to point out about the gaze and like the directionality, when that affects it. So that is
for sure.
Fascinating, depending on the deck too. So
right.
So as we wrap up, I want to just kind of lay it open. Usually I have a planned question that I want to end with, and I sort of do, which is more that, is there anything that you feel in connection either with the Decans and this new book, or completely unconnected? Is there any advice or thoughts that you'd want to leave listeners with about,
Yes, I think what I'd like to say is that it's about working with the cards and allowing them to teach you in very kind of humble, modest ways what they're trying to say. And I know this is a very Virgo thing to say, but I do think people should track. I do think it's important, just because you don't know everything. The card's going to tell you stuff and you're not going to remember, and you're not going to see what the connection was. You don't have to figure it all out. But if you just have something that says, this is what happened today, this is the most important thing that happened today, I don't know what it has to do with the card, but I'm going to know someday, that way, I believe that's how the cards teach us what they're truly about. They will show us. And if we don't have eyes to see, it's okay, because we will someday.
That is really fantastic. And I'm usually pretty good at tracking, but I will take that as, as an important reminder to develop yet another spreadsheet. I will do it.
Even one thing from the day and what card you drew is plenty, and you can figure it all out later.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it's the same. It's like with dream work, you have to track in order, what you pay attention to and what you track, then you can develop that understanding afterwards. So thank you for that.
Precisely. Yeah.
Well, I highly recommend that everyone get your book. It's beautiful. It's inspiring. And I'm sure I'm going to go back to it many, many times. I will also put some of the, links to your pages and other, books and resources. Are there places that people could find you? What would you like them to look you up at?
The easiest place to find everything is at tsusanchang.com. I have links to everything else there. If people want to connect on social media, the best place to do that is at Fortune's Wheelhouse Academy. I'm there every day with spells for my cards and talking to people. And it's a great group of people who are, incredibly engaged in tarot and super smart and super friendly. So it's open to anyone who wants to jump on in.
That's fabulous. All right. Well, thank you to everyone who joined us live and submitted questions. And thank you to everyone who's listening afterwards. And thank you, Susie. I hope that you will write another book so that I can have you back on and we can talk even more, because this is wonderful.
Yes, very important. I can't believe I didn't mention this. Tarot Deciphered is coming out on March 8th. That is the Fortune's Wheelhouse Esoteric Guide to Tarot. I can't believe I didn't mention that. I'm so sorry, Mel. So basically, the first 78 episodes of Fortune's Wheelhouse, are card by card, where we kind of go through all of the esoteric symbolism. It's coming out from Llewellyn. It's 660 pages long. It's a doorstop, and you have to have it. So get that. It's available for pre-order on Amazon.
Oh, that is fabulous. Well, I can see that at some point I'll have you on again. So you've just answered my question.
That would be great. I'd love that. I always love talking to you.
Well,
thank you so much for having me on.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, everyone who's on the call. Bye.
Bye.
A very enjoyable conversation as always, and I'll look forward to seeing Susie's next book and diving into that as well. If you're new to the Decans and would like to know more, I've linked to Austin Kopek's interview about them on the Astrology podcast, as well as linked to some of the written source materials that Susie and I talked about. Gordon White's Decan Walk information is available for his premium members, and I've included a link to his site as well. It's traditional to start the Decan year at either Aries 1, which is March 20th this year, or at Cancer 1, following the more ancient Egyptian New Year, and that is June 20th this year. I'll be restarting my own Decan Walk soon, and I'm looking forward to it. For any listeners out there who've also worked with the Decans, I would love to hear how you've experienced them as well, so feel free to send me a message via the website or on Twitter. As always, thank you for listening. Thank you to everyone who joined in live and submitted questions. Please subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts if you enjoy what we're doing here. It really helps. And check out our website at coffeeanddivination.com. You can also find me on Twitter, where I am at FiddleAngel. Enjoy your journeys with divination, and I'll see you next time.
The stars are all woken, the pollen pats there, so sing with me, darling, let down your long hair. 'Cause how long was the earth there? How long?